A young boy wanders freely out on the streets of Quebec City, a bustling, historic, and cultural city in the Canadian province of Quebec. He has just finished his clarinet lesson and is ecstatic to go back home. He rushes towards the train, which he uses every week to travel. What he doesn't know is that in the distance, someone is watching him. Just as he is in front of the train, the young boy is stopped. He looks up and sees a large man towering over him. The man has an old-fashioned camera in his hands and is taking snapshots of him. The boy is initially confused, but appreciates the attention soon enough. After taking a couple of photos, the man asks the boy if he can take pictures of him in the countryside amongst the greenery. The young and innocent boy, not knowing any better, excitedly agrees. The man takes him to his car, and they drive off in the distance. He was never seen again. You see, unbeknownst to the young child, he had sat in the car with a truly evil man. The boy would become the first victim of the Monster of Pont-Rouge, also known as Leopold Dion. Dion was born on February 25, 1920, in the hamlet of Pont-Rouge, which is west of Quebec City. He was born into a poor family, but wouldn't experience much of that life. This is because he contracted tuberculosis as a mere infant and was sent to a hospital. His parents visit him once a week, but the only consistent human interaction he has is with Catholic nuns, who are amongst the nursing staff. He is essentially isolated, with no real friends or loved ones. This social isolation can be very unhealthy for young children and can damage their psyche greatly. He spent many years alone in this hospital, but his health would slowly improve over time. At the age of 11, Dion is finally healthy enough to go back home. His joy is overwhelming, as he is finally free of the depressing prison he was so desperate to leave. He arrives in time to spend a joyous Christmas with his family and forms a close bond with his brother Roland. Things are finally taking a turn for the good, but only 4 days after being released, his life would crumble again. His parents decide to get a divorce, and neither of them want the children. His hopes were brought up, only to be immediately crushed. Because of this, both brothers are sent to an orphanage, where they are raised by Catholic nuns, a familiar sight for Dion. Being free for only 4 days before being shoved back into a traumatic environment broke him. During their time at the orphanage, Roland and Leopold both get even closer and form a true brotherly bond. The brothers spend around 5 years in the orphanage when Dion decides to look for his father and ask him to take them in. He is willing to work to earn money, as he wants a better life for himself and his brother. After some convincing, his father says yes. Dion works 12 grueling hours a day at a rock quarry with his father. He does this to set up a life for himself and his brother, and his chaotic life seems to be back on track. However, things weren't perfect, as his father was a strict man and was reportedly abusive to him and his brother. In the next year of his life, Dion would slowly change. He begins to be involved in criminal activity as he starts to often engage in petty theft. These small thefts escalate into much larger amounts, and soon he would be committing much more depraved crimes. At only 17 years old, on August 31st, 1937, he was convicted of gross indecency, but since he was a minor, he only got 4 months in penitentiary. Around 2 years later, World War II would begin, and he joined the Canadian Army in 1939. He couldn't control his new impulses, and during the time he served, he attempted to murder a prostitute. However, due to a lack of evidence, he isn't charged for this offense, and is free to go. The judge who handled this case said, "He escaped justice by lack of evidence when he was clearly guilty." There were many indicating signs of the evil man he was becoming, but he was able to slip past justice. In April of 1940, Dion and his brother attacked a woman on a railway track that led to Pont-Rouge. They both sexually assault her, and then stabbed her multiple times, leaving her for dead. It seemed the bond that the two brothers had wasn't exactly a loving one, but one where they united over their twisted desires. The woman miraculously survives, but would be traumatized. She then testifies against the siblings, and Dion is sentenced to life in prison, while his brother gets 10 years. After serving his sentence, Roland would stay away from his brother and would redeem himself with a new life without any crime. It wasn't over. In 1956, due to his good behavior and manipulative charm, Dion was paroled. Soon after, he was arrested for gross indecency with a minor once again. After so many incidents and signs, authorities should have realized that he was a gone case and should have kept him in prison. Yet, once again, he was paroled in 1962. This was the law's greatest mistake, as this is where his murderous spree would start. The young boy from the beginning of the story is named Guy Lucanuk, and he would be Dion's first victim. He would stalk Guy for weeks on the subway, and on April 20th, 1963, he lured him as a photographer. To the country, he raped him, strangled him, and then buried him. Later, he would say that he gave the young boy 2 minutes to pray before he ended his life. He couldn't control his urges for long, and on May 5th, 1963, he took the lives of his second and third victims. Dion used the camera trick to lure 8-year-old Alain Carrier and 10-year-old Michel Morel. He drives them to an abandoned building and ties Alain up with the guise of playing prisoner. He then leads Michel outside and demands that he poses naked. After Michel complies, Dion strangles him to death with a garrote and then returns inside to smother Alain to death. His last murder took place on May 26, 1963. On this day, he lures a 13-year-old boy named Pierre Marquis and takes him near the grave of Guy Lucanuk. He once again demands the boy to pose naked and then attempts to assault him once he does so. Young Pierre fights back, but this angers Dion, and he strangles Pierre to death. Dion had devolved into a sick sadist who would go to the extremes to fulfill his fantasies. It seemed he found his murder pattern, and the citizens of Quebec City began fearing for the fate of their own children. Luckily, Dion was arrested the very next day. Another young boy Dion had assaulted managed to escape from him and gave his description to the police. They were soon able to narrow him down, but the damage had already been done. In confinement, the killer said nothing, but after a month finally confessed. On July 25, 1963, Dion confessed to the 4 murders and admitted to assaulting up to 21 boys. During the confession, he was crying, especially when talking about killing Guy. He sobs, "I didn't want him to tell anybody because I would have to go back to the penitentiary." Due to lack of evidence, Dion was only charged with the murder of Pierre Marquis, and on April 10, 1964, he was sentenced to death. Yet his sentence was once again changed to life in Archambault prison. Despite that, he would still face unexpected and twisted justice. Dion would only serve 7 years of his sentence when, on November 17, 1972, he was stabbed to death by another inmate named Norman Champagne. Finally, his reign of terror would be over. Dion's life was tragic, and he showed potential to live a normal life. However, something changed him. Maybe it was his upbringing in the hospital. Maybe it was the lack of love from his parents. Whatever it was, it had birthed a monster.